All right. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. Happy Friday. Thanks for taking a few minutes of your time to join us to learn about IsoClean. We're going to give a brief, probably 15, 20-minute overview of the product lineup and just go through a few details on each unit. Joining me today is the man, the myth, the legend, Steve Schneider. So without further ado, I will turn things over to him. We'll get going here. Steve, are you there?
Yes, thank you for that
Oh,
outrageous introduction, Ed. I appreciate it.
I'll do what I can.
It is completely untrue. I am not a legend yet.
Not yet.
So we're going to talk about the IsoClean, what it is, a little bit about how it works, and some of the features and options. So you may or may not be familiar with the product, but IsoClean is a portable HEPA air cleaning unit that in recent months, we've started describing it as, by its ability to create a high number of clean air changes per hour within a space. Over the years, the product has had some very specific functions, but over the last year, those applications have broadened to the extent that the unit is being used in really just general purpose filtration now, as opposed to just like a healthcare environment. So if you go to the next slide, we'll talk about the importance of cleaner air. So the IsoClean is using HEPA filtration, and if you look at the chart that you're seeing, it sort of plots clean air changes per hour versus the probability of airborne infection. So Johnson Controls has done some research with the University of Wisconsin, and they took that data and they applied what is known as the Wells-Riley equation to come up with this probability of airborne infection. So you can see on the right in the legend, there's some different types of pathogens, and that's plotted against air changes per hour and probability of airborne infection. So you can see as with no air changes, the probability is quite high. And as you go to 1, 2, 3 air changes, the probability goes down. Now, if you're familiar with empirical data, there's a point that we like to call the point of diminishing returns. So you can see somewhere between 2 and 3 air changes, you start to have what we call diminishing returns. So while you will still get an improvement, or in this case, a reduction of the probability of airborne infection, it becomes progressively smaller as you increase air changes above 2 or 3. So I like to say 3 is sort of the nominal, and 6 is the recommended. The more the better. So a high number of clean air changes, again, reduces the probability of infection. We're using HEPA filtration as our standard filter offering. However, a couple of the models, you can get an ULPA filter upgrade. And then, well, let's just go to the next slide and we'll talk about how the unit's deployed. So I mentioned healthcare environments. So you see this graphic. It's basically a patient room. You're showing a patient room. And the IsoClean is designed to bring the contaminated air in down near the floor. So that is where most of the contaminants tend to end up because of our friend gravity. So they go in through the bottom of the unit, and then in case of the graphic here, we're just showing 100% recirculation, drawing air in from the space and putting out HEPA cleaned air back into the space. So the air goes in through a MERV 8 antimicrobial pre-filter, then it goes through the HEPA filter, and lastly, it's discharged out the top of the unit back into the space. So why is IsoClean important? So, obviously clean air is believed to be, healthy, better for you. Nobody wants to breathe in dusty air. If you've ever been in a wood shop, you know what I mean. Many wood shops have air filtration going all the time. So what we're trying to do is clean the air, in your most widely occupied space, your classrooms, your cafeterias, things like that. So IsoClean offers an easy way to do that, and it's, well, let's just go to the next slide and we'll talk about the lineup. Okay, so there's 3 models. The one in the center we'll start with, that is the IsoClean 800. It is the what I would call the original IsoClean, widely used in healthcare applications. It moves up to 800 CFM, and it's negative pressure capable. And what I mean by that is if you have a patient who possibly has an infectious disease, you don't want the air that they're breathing out to contaminate adjacent spaces, the hallway, other patient rooms, things like that. So this unit can have a duct affixed to it, and the HEPA cleaned air can be ducted out of the space. And when you do that, it makes the space itself, puts it under a negative pressure. So if you're not familiar with what that means, just think of it this way. If you were to crack open the door, you would feel air from the hallway rushing into the room. And that is because the room is under a negative pressure. So the unit on the left is the IsoClean 400. It is, think of it as a half size 800. It's about 2 feet shorter. It uses the same pre-filter, the same fan, but it's only got half of the HEPA filter in it. It's for smaller spaces. That's primarily what it was designed for. It's also negative pressure capable, but it's important to make a distinction that if you're using it for negative pressure, it would have to be in, a pretty small space. So negative pressure, I tend to recommend the 800 still. And then on the right, we have the IsoClean CM. So this unit is quite different from the other 2. It uses a 99.97% high capacity HEPA filter. The other 2 are definitely still high capacity. The 99.97 is a little bit different technology. It's an aluminum separator type filter with a very, it's basically able to move a little bit higher velocity than the other 2. So that unit can move up to 1700 CFM. It comes equipped with an electronically commutated motor, and that allows us to get a pretty wide range of airflow settings. So this one, in theory, could be used anywhere the 400 and 800 could be used, and in much larger spaces as well. So it will go down to about 300 CFM. All 3 models have an optional UV light, and they all feature a limited 1-year warranty. So go to the next slide, we'll talk about, I kind of talked about some of the units, but this slide gives you a view of the filter. So it's sort of a flat panel filter in the IsoClean 400. If you go to the next slide, we'll see the 800. You can see that it's got basically twice the amount of filter. Some of the applications, I mentioned healthcare environments. This unit could still be used in a general purpose filtration application, but the IsoClean CM is much more appropriate for that. So if you go to the next slide, we'll get a glimpse of the CM and what it looks like on the inside. So the IsoClean CM is a highly serviceable unit. The controls are readily accessible on the left side of the unit. You've got a big indicator light, which will turn red if the filter loads up. Now, typically that means that the pre-filter has loaded. So if you change the pre-filter, redeploy the unit, and the light turns green, you're good to go. If you change that pre-filter and you redeploy the unit and the light stays red, that's an indication that you have a restriction somewhere else in the system, but more often than not, it's going to be the main HEPA filter. So that's how that filter indicator light works. The little display on the right that you see where it says 1127, that's the digital controller that sends commands to the ECM motor. So you will adjust the set point of the unit here from 1 to 100% of its airflow capability. So think about it this way, with 1% being equal to 300 CFM and 100% being equal to 1700. It's pretty much a linear adjustment from 1 to 100. So it will alternate between the set point and the motor RPM, just to give you an idea of the motor speed. Now the graphic down below, when you want to service this unit, you remove 4 screws, the front panel completely comes off. It's very lightweight. You set it aside. The pre-filter down below, the HEPA filter in the middle, and the UV light fixture. They're all readily accessible for change out. The motor comes out the motor blower comes out pretty easily. So if there's a problem with anything on this unit, it's very serviceable. Now this photograph is showing the front off with the UV light on, and I want to stress that that is an absolute no-go. It was only done for photographic effect here. So anytime you're working on this unit, you want to make sure that it's unplugged, turned off and unplugged, because the UV light can be damaging to your eyesight. So applications, you can see most of these are larger type things, auditoriums, restaurants. These things are going into a lot of classrooms. If you go to the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about, how the unit stacks up against leading competitors. So we acquired a competitive unit and compared it to the IsoClean CM. So there was a 200 CFM advantage. So what that means is you can use this unit in a larger space, but it also means in the same space, you could, if you were to adjust this unit to a lower airflow, the filter would last longer in the IsoClean CM. The sound levels were quieter. On average, we were about 2 dBA lower on the IsoClean CM. The power consumption was lower. The competitive unit was labeled 12 amps. When we turned it on, it was pulling 14 amps. So I don't know how to explain that. I was measuring that with a calibrated piece of equipment, so it should be accurate. The IsoClean CM consumes about 10.6 amps when it's running at full speed. Filter media, compared to a leading competitor, the CM has about 30% more filter media, so that means longer filter life. Serviceability. The CM was much easier to service. The competitive unit required a lot of hardware removal to gain access to the filter and remove the main HEPA filter. Aesthetics, a lot nicer on the CM. It's a painted white unit, very clean lines. The competitive unit was covered in labels. We have all of the required labeling, so just much better for your just general aesthetics in a space. Assembly. So there's no assembly required on the IsoClean CM. It comes on a pallet, and it is wrapped in plastic, covered in a cardboard carton, and banded. So it comes off the skid very easily. It's probably a 2-person job just for safety reasons. Getting it off the skid, you want to take great care in doing that, but there's no assembly required. The leading competitive unit that we checked out You had to assemble some discharge grills as well as put the wheels onto the unit. And then digital speed control, we've already talked about that. So we can jump to the next slide, which is essentially the last slide. We've got one more at the end, but this is just highlighting the 5, big advantages of the IsoClean over, what I tend to call Amazon units. So there's a lot of, in today's climate and air filtration, there's a lot of companies that have popped up and they're selling low CFM units. They're made offshore in very high volume, and most of them don't move nearly as much air as the IsoClean. So most of them are around 300 CFM. So the IsoClean has a huge advantage in air change rate. You can serve much larger spaces than those Amazon units. So advantage number 2, build quality. I mentioned offshore and plastic. The IsoClean is made of steel, and which of course is much more durable than plastic. It's got a nice textured powder coat paint finish for many, many years of reliable service. Advantage number 3, the filter media. So the IsoClean CM has a 24 by 24 by 12 high capacity HEPA filter. Most of these Amazon units have a very, very small HEPA filter, and they'll require frequent changeouts. So if you think about your vacuum cleaner for a minute, about 20 years ago, it became popular to market vacuum cleaners, with a HEPA filter. And if you've ever popped that little HEPA filter out of that vacuum cleaner, you notice that it was about 8 inches long by 3 inches wide, maybe by a ½ inch deep. It didn't really, and there was a very high velocity going through it. So I think it was probably made out of HEPA media. I would be willing to bet that it wasn't subjected to any tests that would give it a true HEPA certification. So advantage number 4, UV lights. All the IsoClean models can be upgraded to include an optional UV light. Most of the online units don't have a UV light, and the ones that do probably don't have nearly enough UV to make any difference. And of course, advantage number 5, God bless America, IsoClean is made in the USA. So we're manufactured in Sanford, North Carolina. We've been manufacturing the IsoClean for about 25 years. We've got the units in stock, and we're able to ship quickly. Obviously Amazon can ship quickly too, but look at the rest of these advantages you're going to get. So go to the next slide. This is basically just how to get in touch with us. Depending on which business you contact, you're going to get the same level of great service. So let's just open it up for some questions if we